Welcome back, friends, to another Before You Read lecture for our Reading the Bible Together course. This is the first lecture in a series related to the theme of friendship in the Bible. You may know and remember that as a part of another program here at First Presbyterian Church of Atlanta, we're digging in to the idea, the theme of friendship from a variety of angles. We'll consider it from a biblical perspective, theological perspective, practical, sociological, and so forth. And so for the months in front of us, we'll spend some time thinking about friendship as it appears in the Bible. Again, just to reiterate the sort of why friendship? There's a number of reasons. One, we could just look at the landscape in which we find ourselves in America and see that there is a need for deeper friendships, deeper relationships, deeper trusting and supportive and challenging relationships. You can think of the culture of contempt, as Arthur Brooks has called it, the idea of despising and thinking that other people who are different are not just different, but that they're almost subhuman because of those differences. Or we could think of political polarization, which I know many of us are thinking about and praying about, that we experience on a daily basis in this country. Or we could think about what has been described by some medical professionals as the loneliness epidemic. There was some recent research done that suggested that more than a diet or even smoking, a lack of friendship, a lack of meaningful connections with other people is a greater health risk to a person's long-term well-being. So again, in other words, it is a greater risk to your health to be without friends than it is to eat McDonald's every day or smoke cigarettes regularly. It's a staggering suggestion. And so friendship is so important. And as we continue to identify and wrestle with a post-COVID reality, friendship also seems like a very worthy and important theme. With the rest of this lecture, I want to do three things. I want to provide a brief overview and introduction to the book of Proverbs, just in case you're unfamiliar with it or need a quick review. Then I'll say a few words about the texts that I've selected from Proverbs. And then finally, I will introduce our guiding questions. And my hope, my thought on this first lecture of many is that we will use these questions sort of throughout our study together. And we'll see if that works with our future readings or not. But that's my intention at this point. To begin, Proverbs. Proverbs is a book of wisdom. It falls within a larger genre, although some scholars debate whether or not there is such a genre in the Bible or in the larger ancient Mediterranean world. But wisdom literature, it's an international phenomenon. The wisdom literature that we associate with the Bible is Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the wisdom of Solomon, the wisdom of Ben Sira. These are all examples of wisdom literature. Job, perhaps, is in the wisdom genre. And when we think about what we find in the Bible, in Proverbs in particular, there are some connections, some resonances with other cultural forms of wisdom, whether Egyptian or otherwise, Persian. But then it also has its sort of distinctive and maybe definitive perspectives as well. HarperCollins Study Bible Introduction to Proverbs talks about the wisdom of the marketplace. And it's important to note that wisdom as it is represented in Proverbs is not a matter of special revelation. It's not a matter of a dream or a word from on high. It's rather knowledge that is gathered from observation. It is knowledge that comes through the observation of human experience in both the social and natural orders. It is knowledge of human experience that is confirmed and passed down over generations. And it is a wisdom and an observation that serves as the basis for theological and moral insight. We might describe the wisdom of Proverbs as an observable or even predictable wisdom. In other contexts, I've described Proverbs as, quote, normal wisdom. It is sort of 9 out of 10 dentists recommend, right, that you brush your teeth or you floss. That's kind of what wisdom literature is. It's an accumulation of insight about how to live the good life, about how to live the best life, and that's normally going to work. That's why it's called normal wisdom. Throughout the wisdom literature, and in Proverbs we'll see this as well, there's often a strong contrast between wisdom on the one hand and folly on the other. And there are a number of synonyms or similar words for both wisdom and for folly. And for both wisdom and folly, there's both an idea of moral or ethics, but also one of good judgment for wisdom or poor judgment for folly. So it's both perspective and sort of a moral compass, both wisdom and folly. And because of this, the wisdom literature often delights in contrasts between wisdom and folly, between insight and lack of insight, between the good and the bad, very often drawn in very stark binaries, right? You're either wise or you're foolish. You either have insight or you don't. You either are open to correction or you reject it. The wisdom literature can tend to leave little room for debate or for dissonance. To say a few more words just more broadly or generally about Proverbs, in addition to what I just said about wisdom literature, Proverbs is, as many of you know, I'm sure, traditionally associated and attributed to King Solomon, the son of David. But if you read Proverbs from cover to cover, one of the things that you'll see is that Solomon is not the only person who is attributed to these writings. There's other figures, some who we know, some who we don't, who are represented as the sort of source or authority of these wisdom sayings. And so it's very likely that these traditions became associated with Solomon because of what we see in 1 Kings 3 through 4, where Solomon, is acclaimed for having wisdom, being the wisest of the wise, and that notion sort of gets picked up in biblical tradition. And this larger collection of wisdom sayings, wisdom stories, wisdom poems sort of get attributed to Solomon. Even though they may have been written, they may have originated hundreds of years after the death of Solomon. It seems as though the final form of the book of Proverbs as we know it likely came around the end of the Persian period or the beginning of the Hellenistic period. So hundreds of years after the life of Solomon, which I think is an important thing for us to note, that there is a timeless quality to the book of Proverbs, a timeless quality to wisdom literature that is not always located in a particular historical context or milieu. We can see in some places in the Proverbs that it really represents the ideas or the perspectives or the worldview of an intellectual elite. Proverbs, not all in all places, but throughout, represents it as the idea of a father passing down wisdom to a son. So there is a sort of the fatherly advice, the parental advice that we see happening in Proverbs. And Proverbs makes the statement that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. One of the things that we'll see, especially in chapters 1 through 9, we're only going to read, I think, one of those chapters, chapter 7, for this assignment. But one of the things that Proverbs is known for is the personification of wisdom as a woman. So woman wisdom is something that you'll hear talked about in the scholarly writings about Proverbs. And there's good debates about the identity of this woman, about the function of woman wisdom in Proverbs, about the woman's relationship to other women in Proverbs, most of whom are depicted in rather negative language. So the woman of folly, the adulterous woman, the strange or foreign woman. And so there's this parallel, perhaps, between the woman of wisdom and these other women who present a threat to the son following in the way of the father, and following in the way of wisdom. Quick outline: chapters 1 through 9 are pretty consistent wisdom poems, is the way that the HarperCollins Study Bible describes them. Chapters 10 through 30 are more like mini lectures, two-line artistic proverbs. It's really difficult, can be really difficult to sort of outline this material, because some of it you'll see threads that relate, but others they're just proverbs, right? They're just wise sayings. And so there's less a focus on literary context and how does this relate to what precedes or what follows it. And I want to say one final thing about Proverbs, and that is it draws heavily on the literary device known as parallelism, which is a device that uses 2 or maybe 3 lines to make a point. And there's 3 types of parallelism that are important for reading Proverbs and understanding. The first is synonymous parallelism, and this is kind of what it sounds like. The first or the second line simply restates what the first line says. So we don't need to sort of throw ourselves into trying to figure out what the differences are. It's just a matter of restating or saying again what the first line says. Then there is antithetical parallelism. Again, what does it sound like? It sounds like the second line is going to be a contrast with the first line. So if the first line is concerned with wisdom, you can expect that the second line is going to deal with folly, or vice versa. And then a third form of parallelism is known as formal or synthetic parallelism. And this is when the second or third line advances the thought of the first line. So it sort of continues it on, it builds on it. It doesn't simply repeat it as with synonymous. It doesn't contrast it as with antithetical, but it builds on it and pushes it forward. I think that's all I want to say about Proverbs and about the wisdom of literature at this moment. Let me give you the 3 guiding questions for our section from Proverbs. First, let me say that the selection from Proverbs is a little bit random. It may seem that way. I have simply selected those chapters where the word friend or friendship occurs. And that's why we're reading this sort of chunk of literature. One of the things that will stand out immediately is that we don't have here a sort of separate essay on friendship. It's not a topic in and of itself. Rather, it is embedded and enmeshed with these larger wisdom sayings. And so just be aware of that. And be on the lookout for the word friend and friendship in your reading. So here are the recurring questions that I want you to think about as you read our selection from Proverbs. One is, what is a friend like? Or what is friendship like? In other words, what are the characteristics of friendship? Second, what is a friend for? What are the benefits of friendship? In other words, what is the function of a friend or the function of friendship? And finally, how, if at all, does God relate to friendship? Now, all 3 of these questions should be confined or in conversation with what you see in Proverbs. And if you're looking for a short writing assignment, here's what I would suggest. Take this beginning of a sentence and write another 2 to 4 sentences to fill it in. So here's the prompt. According to Proverbs, friendship is blank. And fill in that blank. Fill in that blank based on your reading of Proverbs and what you see there. So again, according to Proverbs, friendship is blank. Fill in the blank with just 2 or 4 sentences. It doesn't have to be detailed. It doesn't have to be refined. It can just be your thoughts as you've read this section from Proverbs. Well, friends, that's the end of this first video lecture on our theme of friendship for reading the Bible together. I hope that you have a better sense of Proverbs and are interested in how friendship is depicted in Proverbs, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thanks, as always, for your attention, and happy reading.